You on BBC Radio Leeds. Hello, good afternoon. This is Richard. It's 11 minutes after 5 on this Monday afternoon. Survivors West Yorkshire is a charity that provides support to male survivors of sexual violence. It offers a confidential advice service and one-to-one counselling. As you've been hearing in the news with Clive, they've launched a huge campaign to raise awareness of the recovery and growth support available to male survivors aged 16 and over. I've been speaking with Robert Balfour. Robert is the founder and CEO at Survivors West Yorkshire.
Good afternoon, Richard. Thank you for inviting me onto your show.
Well, thank you for coming on. I have just explained sort of the headlines about what Survivors West Yorkshire is all about. Just tell us a little bit more, if you would, please.
So Survivors West Yorkshire has been around for about 24 years this coming February. And we've always been, as well as a service deliverer, a small micro charity, always been campaigning to create awareness for sexual violence survivors with a main focus on males who are often hidden and don't believe there's any services for them.
Why did you get involved? Was this your thing to start with? Did you set this up? Did you feel that there was nothing for men in that way?
So I was working in mental health services during the 1990s, and I'm a survivor myself, and my own experience was brought into national prominence by a major inquiry that was published in 2000. And that made me look around for services for myself as much as anything else. And I couldn't find anything. So I decided to create something as much as I could, in effect, off the kitchen table, to be honest with you, using the emerging internet, so using email and text, particularly to signpost people to any services I can find, mostly males and females as well, because Red Crisis was struggling to be funded at that time. So it was a landscape of emptiness for survivors in the early noughties. So I decided to try and do something about that whilst working full-time in a mental health NHS social services context.
Does this affect many more people than perhaps someone who isn't a survivor or knows a survivor could imagine?
So survivors often are portrayed by myths. So we're seeing that the stories emerging about certain celebrities this weekend, and very serious allegations. The issue for survivors is that society doesn't really want to hear the story because it's uncomfortable. So myths and misinformation predominantly kind of run through society. In many ways, it runs the cycle of denial and avoidance, which leads us back to these issues again and again over decades because we don't deal with it. So a lot of people are impacted by survivors, so not directly in the myths that survivors become abusers directly. Survivors can abuse, but mostly they abuse themselves. So whether you're male or female, it's drug addiction, work addiction, relationship avoidance, relationship challenges in relation to trust. You know, the list is endless because the emotional trauma of betrayal in childhood and sexual violation just is the landscape in which that betrayal takes place.
Tell us about this specific campaign, if you would, please, Robert.
So this campaign really arose because every time almost we have a survivor who connects to us and refers into our service, and we ask them, you know, where they heard about us, and they say it's on advertising. We ask them why they didn't contact anyone before, and they'll say, well, I didn't know you existed. It's only because I heard it on the radio or I saw it on that TV advert. You know, it's on the back of my bus in one case. You know, it's really about bringing awareness to males that they have an entitlement to seek support for the sexual violence that was done to them, often in childhood mostly, and they don't have to live with the legacy of that in silence because it affects everything, often in the background of their lives.
This is particularly aimed at 16 pluses, isn't it?
Yeah, so we would, you know, there were massive needs for minus 16, to be honest with you, for services for males and females. But we only work 16 plus, and most of our clients are 18, 20 plus. And we work with people up to their 60s and their 70s in some cases. So, and we do, according to the feedback from our clients, it makes a lot of difference to finally be in a space that is currently people describe as trauma-informed. We would use the word safe and validating. We kind of get it. You don't have to prove anything to us. All we want is you to be able to move on from the legacies left to you by the abuse and live a life that's well lived, because you deserve.
What would you see as success from this campaign? What are you hoping will happen, Robert?
We're hoping to see more awareness of our service. We're hoping to see more male survivors come forward. We're not expecting to have 1 million male survivors emerge from the West Yorkshire population and reach for support. But what we are expecting is more males, hopefully, to be aware. And that may not be instant awareness. That might be their wife or their mother or their auntie or their friend at work who they've disclosed to, telling them about the service some way down the line, and then them seeking support. What we've seen over the 20 plus years we've been working, it takes a long time for males to reach out because they've buried it so deep, because it scares them, the idea that the world will not see them as male anymore. And of course they're male. In fact, they're heroes for having survived those criminal offences done to them, again, mostly as children. So, our message to them is, you are courageous for keeping that secret, but you don't have to keep it anymore, because we're here to help you as much as we can.
And finally, is that kind of the message you would give to anybody listening to this who, well, unfortunately for them, there's bells ringing with some of the things that you've said?
You are more than the experience of sexual abuse. When you look at your life in its totality, you will have been successful in areas that you don't really see. And where you have stumbled, you've been carrying a legacy that, is difficult to carry, but you can move on from it and you can live a life that's much more positive and free. You can grow. And, with recovery, wherever it is, recovering yourself, but also it's about growing and being free of the dysfunction of the abuser. And that's very possible. It's not a miracle. It doesn't require super science. It just requires a lot of compassion, support, and you being free to feel safe to make those steps.
Robert Balfour from Survivors West Yorkshire, thank you for talking to us on BBC Radio Leeds.
Thank you very much for letting me on, Richard. Thank you.
Gail Lofthouse.
Nolene. He said, when I was a child, I